Right. So I know I already teased a gear story in our last surface interval episode, but to kick off today's episode, I think I'll share about my first set of dive gear, which was actually to me. So it's super nice. I didn't have to spend any money for it. Somebody was nice enough to give me a BCD and regulator that they had bought for their child, and their child, for one reason or another, didn't like it. So it was offered to me. It was brand spanking new, like I think used once in the pool prior to me. So it was a wonderful opportunity to get some dive gear and get diving. Definitely on a budget because it was hashtag free. Which, if you know me, you know free is for me. So here I was going to the ocean for the first time with this set of dive gear, which, by the way, was different from what I learned on. It was a different style of BCD, which we'll get into later in the episode when we talk about the different types of gear that you can purchase. But I went to the ocean and I was in a different wetsuit because I had bought a warmer wetsuit from my local dive shop. And then I was in this new BCD and regulator set, and I'm in the ocean. And I think Shannon and Danny, actually, Danny, you weren't at this dive, but Shannon was. I was like miserably out of weight. So much so that Shannon had to like give me a rock to hold on to so I could stay under the water. It was pretty embarrassing. And I was like, I swear I'm a good diver. But this gear was not it. And I understood quickly why the person that gave it to me wanted to get rid of it because it was not the best gear. And so hopefully today, we can talk about how you don't make that mistake and how you get yourself into a good set of gear that's gonna allow you to keep diving, maybe with us, who knows?
I mean, I totally relate to that story because my first set of gear was in part given to me for free and super grateful for it, but definitely sometimes you need to upgrade and that's okay, that's life. Last episode, we did a surface interval where we talked about Matt's safety and risk management background and my background in archaeology and underwater archaeology, while Danny was off being responsible and doing grown up things that we didn't want to do. Today, we are going to be talking a little bit about gear and how to buy your first set of scuba gear without going broke or getting scammed. As a reminder, this podcast is again not advice, not being taken as a teaching moment or anything like that, even though some of us are dive professionals or training to be dive professionals. This podcast is solely a group of three people talking about diving, talking about their experience diving, but it is not to be used as training, not to be used as advice. It is simply some friends talking about the stuff they love. So to get into gear a little bit, I currently dive a Halcyon backplate and wing with a Atomic ST1 regulator. There are so many different letter number combos for those, but I believe it is an ST1 regulator. It's the steel because I I do some pretty aggressive diving for work sometimes, so it's nice and sturdy for me. And I dive a integrated Air 2, which means that my backup, instead of being a secondary hose with mouthpiece, it's integrated into my inflator hose. And that's my main setup as far as BC and reg go. I can get more into my wetsuits when we get to that section of it, but for now we'll say Halcyon backplate and wing with an ST1 regulator and integrated secondary.
So I think I have a bit of brand loyalty issue. So I have a Hollis backplate and wing for my primary dive setup, and I have Hollis DX7 first stages and Hollis LX150 second stages. They both match, so it doesn't matter which one's my primary or secondary because they're the exact same. Um, so that's for my regs and for my backplate and wing. I also have a Hollis M4 mask and a Hollis DX3000 dry suit is what I use for my primary exposure protection. And then the one thing that's not Hollis is my fins. My fins are uh, Fourth Element Tech fins.
Yeah, I'm also pretty loyal to one brand. I love Fourth Element gear. I have the Argonaut 3.0 dry suit, the Seeker mask, and the Tech fins. And I dive a Atomic M1. I like the necklace configuration rather than the Octo. So I've got two M1s, and I have a dive right, back plate, and wing.
I definitely have the least brand loyalty of the three of us. I have, I think, two or three masks, and I don't know if I could even tell you what brand any of them are off the top of my head. And I have so many sets of fins that are,
Yeah, I gotta agree. I mean my like what I would say is like my frontline gear, what I'm gonna dive mostly is pretty brand loyal, but then I have like a whole host of different wetsuits from like three or four different brands, and probably six or seven sets of fins at this point, um, which also span different brands. But, you know, we're going to talk about that. And there's a lot of different reasons to use different types of gear, and what works for me might not work for Shannon, and what works for Shannon might not work for Danny. Um, Ironically, Danny and I are diving the same fin at the moment. Um, and I may have copied him. So, anyways,
Imitation is the best form of flattery.
who said that? Was that Dwight K. Schrute?
God,
gear can be so overwhelming because there are so many choices. There are so many options, so many brands, so many styles of fin mat. Like if we're just going the basics, there are just so many options of them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my first time walking into our local dive shop and looking at. So, some of our listeners may have been to our local dive shop. Some of our listeners may be across the world, so they haven't been to our local dive shop. However, I walked into our local dive shop for the first time, and the way that the dive shop is kind of set up is there's just this like massive wall of um, masks, fins, and snorkels. Um, and so like I walked in and it was like I think to date there's 200 different styles of masks on the wall in the shop, and probably I don't know 30 or 40 different fins. So I was like, oh boy, um, I gotta try every single mask on. And I think I did sit there for like an hour and a half one day, just putting all of the different masks on my face to see how they feel. So it can be super overwhelming, and I think that that's kind of um, the thing that we got to stress here is there is a lot of options in dive gear, and there may be something that like looks super cool, but then you go and put that mask on your face and you can't get it to seal. And it's like, while it may look like the coolest mask and you might look super cool sporting that mask, if it keeps flooding your whole dive, you're going to have a really uncomfortable dive. Um, and then you're going to look foolish because you always have water in your mask. And you don't want that. So, while it may look cool when you look in the mirror, it's more about comfort and fit, I think, than anything. And I know there's some dive fashionistas out there who definitely care about how things look, and you can look cool with gear that fits. So, it's not to say you can't look good. It's just that the fit is more important.
Absolutely. There's also a push to have all of your own gear right off the bat. And while there is something to be said that if you own gear, you're probably more likely to go consistently, I think we want to kind of cut down that myth because there's so many options and so many ways to rent, to, you know, to still get out there, to still get wet and not have to shell out thousands of dollars right after getting certified.
Yeah, so true. So true. And we're going to talk about that all today. So treat for our listeners. All right, friends, do we have like a horror story of a bad purchase or being sold something that you didn't need?
It's not a horror story or a bad purchase, but definitely selling something that I don't need. And it's gonna hark back to last surface interval episode. I have a dive knife. I've never used it. I spent so much money on the dive knife, and it just like sits in my bit of gear because I don't use it. So again, not like a horror story, not like particularly bad, just kind of a minor waste of money. It's cool to have, and for non-divers, it can be like, look at my knife, and they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. But for divers, it doesn't matter.
I also I can relate to that. I too have purchased a dive knife that I have never actually put on my gear. I was like, oh, this is like a small little dive knife. It looks awesome. Like that won't be like, nobody's gonna turn their head at that dive knife. And it's literally sat on my kitchen table since the day I bought it. So clearly I haven't found a need for it yet.
I wouldn't say I have a horror story, but I definitely have a regret in a purchase that I made back a couple years ago. When I was new to diving in New England, all I had was a 5 mil wetsuit that I would bring to Florida, and obviously that's not warm enough for the water around here. So I'd rent a two-piece 7 mil wetsuit. And I had seen my instructor when I got certified in Rockport wearing a semi-dry wetsuit, and I thought those looked a lot cooler. And being thinner, I wouldn't have to bring as much lead on each dive and carry around as much weight. So when a sale came around at a dive shop more local to out on the coast where we dive, I found a semi-dry wetsuit that fit me, and I bought that one and shelled out a lot of money for it. And as soon as I used it, I kind of realized I had made a mistake because that 7 to 8 millimeter thick wetsuit, even though it was a semi-dry, once it gets compressed at depth, it's not nearly as warm as a two-piece seven. So that's why I like to call the two-piece 7 mil wetsuit the poor man's dry suit or the poor diver's dry suit, because there's just about, you can dive just about anywhere in a two-piece 7 mil. You can take one half to warmer waters. You can use both layers up here in Rockport, and you could probably dive year round using it. And they're competitively priced with a semi-dry, but I would say they're more versatile and warmer at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know what a two-piece uh, wetsuit is basically what you do is you wear uh, it almost looks like the best way I could describe it is like overalls, is the under layer, and then you do like a step-in kind of coat style um, piece for the top half. So like on the core, you're basically wearing two layers of 7 mil um, neoprene, which is like super warm over your vital organs, and then it's really your arms and legs that are exposed to 7 mil, which is still pretty warm, especially in these New England waters. But to have that extra warmth over your core, I think makes the diving a little bit more enjoyable. So if just for a little context for those who may not know, like what is this two-piece wetsuit? I didn't know they made a two-piece. That's kind of what it is. And I also have both a two-piece wetsuit and a semi-dry wetsuit. And part of me wishes that I just stuck with the two-piece until I was had saved up enough money to buy my dry suit. Because I kind of think I bought my semi-dry as the like intermediate, like, oh, I can't afford the dry suit yet, but you know, this semi-dry is like a little bit more in my price range, so like let me buy that. But I agree, at depth it's still cold.
Back when I wore that two-piece wetsuit, I'd also wear a hooded vest under it, so I was wearing probably 18 millimeters of neoprene on my core. Um, so I needed a lot of weight to be able to be neutrally buoyant, but
I think I'd need a fan under there if I had 18 millimeters of
for a
neoprene.
scooter.
Ironically, I have almost the exact opposite feeling about the two-piece suit versus the semi-dry. My first suit that I ever bought was also a two-piece suit, and I hated it. I hate the bulkiness of it, and I hate how much weight that I needed. And when I actually bought a used semi-dry from that same shop, I have never gone back to using my two-piece suit. And I don't always dive my dry suit that I own now. And whenever I am in New England diving, I will choose diving in my semi-dry over my two-piece 7 mil because for me, and I don't know if maybe when I bought that two-piece suit, it never really fit me correctly, so there's a lot more flow of water. But for me, I had to wear I didn't have to, but there was a time in my life where I wore a 3 mil, a 5 mil, and my two-piece 7 suit at one dive in Rockport, and I was still freezing cold. And I also had a hooded vest. I don't know, I was like the Stay Puffed man. It was awful. It was miserable, and I was wearing so much weight. But I once I switched to the semi-dry, I don't know if it was my brain tricking itself into thinking I'm warmer, but I feel like I'm much warmer in my semi-dry, and I use that suit during our like deep freeze and super cold dives.
So I'll just add a piece of like buyer beware with a semi-dry wetsuit is you can't pee in a semi-dry wetsuit, or at least you really might not want to pee in your semi-dry wetsuit because it doesn't flush water through it. Like basically the concept of that semi-dry wetsuit is once it gets that like layer of water in there, the wrists and leg kind of seals, as they were, aren't are designed such that you don't have water moving through them, and if it's properly fit, as soon as the neoprene gets saturated with water, that's the one and only time it's going to get saturated your entire dive. So if you do pee in your semi-dry wetsuit, that pee is likely staying in your wetsuit for the duration of your dive. So just a little buyer beware about semi-dry wetsuits is if you are somebody who needs to pee a lot during your dive, it might not be the best option for you. So
Or
take,
who knows, you get to really warm up your suit.
yeah, I'd rather just be warm.
I agree. I agree.
All right, so let's shift away from peeing in our semi-dries and get into some gear priorities. So I think we'll start with the big three. So mask, snorkel, and fins. Likely this is something you may already have purchased because if you're listening and you're already a certified diver, then you would have needed that piece of equipment for your course for open water. But I think even sometimes when you take that course, you may have gone online and found kind of that cheap mask fin snorkel combo, or you just kind of got what your local shop recommended, but you didn't necessarily have the kind of brain space to start thinking about like, well, is this the best gear for me, or did I just get this because it's what was, on special on the dive website. So I think let's talk about the big three, mask, snorkel, and fins, and then we can kind of get deeper into some of the other gear stuff.
For sure. I think one big thing is you again, like Matt said, if you are buying this stuff, or if you're listening to this podcast, you probably either are interested in getting certified, already certified, or in the process of getting certified. And for those latter two, it means you probably already have your mask fin snorkel. And you're gonna find out at the end of your class whether or not you really like them or not. Because before you get in the pool with them, you have your fit test. You do your fit test, and yeah, it's comfortable on your face. You don't know how much you're gonna like it in the water. You're not sure about any of that kind of stuff yet. So it's always unfortunate that at the end of the class, you're like, wow, if I bought my mask, fin, and snorkels now, I'd have a great idea of what I want. So on that, I will say buying from a local dive shop, especially one that has a pool connected to it or does classes and is willing to let you try different gear on in their pool to see what it fits is really helpful. because while they are basic and simple, there are variations between them that will make a huge difference.
And I think something to think about when you're buying a set of fins specifically, is to really think about where it is that you're going to do the majority of your diving. I know as somebody who hangs around the pool a lot when Shannon is teaching and Danny is assisting with teaching those classes, um, that a lot of times students will make a decision on buying their set of fins, not necessarily thinking about where am I going to get certified in the open water and where am I going to continue diving after I get certified. So there's two basic types of fins. There's open heel fins and then there's full foot fins. And the big difference between full foot fins and open heel fins is full foot fins, you're just sliding your foot into the fin. Whereas an open heel fin, you are gonna need some sort of like dive shoe or booty, as we like to call it in the industry, to complement the fin. So, if you're somebody who's gonna be diving in colder water, 100% the better option is to buy the open heel fin with a booty because now you have exposure protection over your feet, which, if you're anything like me, that's what gets cold first, is my toes. Um, so, when you're buying your first set of fins, you kind of want to start thinking about, all right, so I'm buying a set of fins. I live in New England. I'm going to be doing most of my diving in New England. And even in the summertime, when the water is at its warmest here in New England, you still need to have exposure protection on your feet. So, if I was a New England diver and I knew that most of my diving was going to happen in New England, and I'm only looking to buy one set of fins to be my kind of catch-all fin that I can wear anywhere, I'm going with the open heel fin with a set of booties because then if I go somewhere warm like Florida, Key Largo for diving, right, I can still use that fin with a booty. I might need a thinner set of boots, less exposure. Or honestly, you could probably still get away with the boots that you have up here for New England. Um, but it's a more versatile option. Whereas if I'm like, all right, after I finish my class, and so, Shannon and Danny both help out with a dive program at our local college. Um, in that program, we see students at the college from all over the world. So we have some students who are here at the college who live in, Hawaii, and that's they're here for school, and then they're going home after the semester ends, and they're going back to Hawaii. Now, if you're going to be diving in Hawaii for the rest of your time diving, you probably can get away with a full foot fin that you would, utilize in the pool because you're going to be diving in warm water. And so you got to know like where am I going to be diving and what is the best option for me. So that would be my advice on fins, especially if you don't want to buy multiple sets of fins. Now, I know the three of us have over the years acquired both full foot fins and open heel fins and kind of are able to interchange them to utilize depending on the environment we're in. However, I think if we're staying true to like buying on a budget and only buying one, you want to get a set of fins that's going to be able to be used the most out of the different applications that you may be diving in. So think about where am I going to go diving? Um, and then in terms of snorkels, and I think the other two will roll their eyes at me when I say this, I would say buy the cheapest snorkel humanly possible. Go to your dive shop and be like, I want the cheapest snorkel. What do you have? Here's why I say that. So, snorkels are required while you're in class. Once you're out of class, having that snorkel is up to you. Now, depending on the dive application, still do sometimes put my snorkel on my setup when I go diving. However, what I'll say is, sometimes, aka most of the time, I don't wear my snorkel afterwards now that I'm a certified diver. It's not a required piece of gear once you're certified. So, get what you need to do the class. It's good to have it. Keep it in your dive bag in case you find yourself in a space where you're like, oh, the water is looking a little choppy today. Maybe I want my snorkel. Or sometimes you finish your dive and you're like, all right, like, I'm out of air in my cylinder, but like I could go snorkeling for a little while and just, hang out in the water. Maybe not so much around here in New England, but I know certainly when we go down south, uh, we love to jump back in the water while other people are finishing their dives and kind of just snorkel around for a bit. So it's a good piece of equipment to have, but I don't think you need to waste a ton of money on it for what you're using it for.
Snorkels also have a lot of bells and whistles on them. They can have a lot of bells and whistles on them. And this is one place where I definitely agree that my snorkel when I first bought it, it is a tube. You know, it's a tube that looks like a J. It doesn't have a cap, it doesn't have a purge. It's a straw. And I like it a lot. And I, despite diving for 7-ish years, have never bought a new snorkel and never found the need to buy a new snorkel. The only new snorkel that I would think about buying is you can buy ones that fold up in your pocket. And I really like that because again, that way I can put it in a BC pocket. I can put it in a dry suit pocket. I can have it physically on me. So if I do need it, I have it. My snorkel is hard plastic. I can bring it with me in my car. I can, leave it with me there, but I won't be able to physically have it with me if I want to at some point put it on. So I do like the idea of those roll up rubber snorkels for that. The only time that I've needed a snorkel and not had one, and then I learned from this mistake, so I have one from now on, was I was doing work and the water was so shallow that we didn't need to be on scuba. We only needed to be on snorkel to do our work. And I was like, dang, maybe I should keep my snorkel on me. So again, it's good to have it on you, even if you're not going to be using it, because you can just putz around and have fun with it afterwards. But yeah, no, I don't see the need for extra bells and whistles when it comes to a snorkel. I think you learn how to snorkel better without them personally, in my opinion. So if you are interested in snorkeling and learning the techniques of clearing your snorkel, the bells and whistles make it harder to learn those techniques because they don't even allow water in the snorkel sometimes. So,
My personal preference for masks is a single lens mask, but you know, you're gonna shop around and find what you want, especially if you have the ability to go to a dive shop in person, and ask the staff there all the questions you have about masks or any of the other gear. But I just think you have a better field of vision in the single lens options, and I'd prefer a low volume mask, so long as that's the best fit. I would go with the lowest volume mask because it's less work to clear the mask. Um, so I think the benefits are pretty clear there. When you have, a better field of vision and it's less work to clear the mask, you're going to be more comfortable on your dive. And when it comes to, the way the masks look, I prefer a black skirt or an opaque skirt versus the clear silicone. But some people like the clear silicone because you kind of get a little more periphery vision with the clear skirt. But I just think that the black mask looked better personally. And sometimes I don't necessarily want to have all that peripheral vision, especially when everything's kind of blurry. Like, is that my buddy or is that a shark right next to me? Like I'd rather kind of only be able to see what's right in front of me. So yeah, I would say those are my mask thoughts.
the additionally, if you do have a low volume but dark or opaque skirt mask, the low volume kind of imitates a periphery too, which I really like. When I was first buying my mask, I only ever did clear skirts because I wanted that periphery. I will say, in really murky water, I have very frequently been like, oh my gosh, there's a shark coming right up on my shoulder because the just like shadows look like things swimming up to you. So it can be a little spooky. But those low volume masks or low profile masks can act as a good periphery too, which is something that I really have enjoyed recently when I switched to wearing an opaque skirt instead of the clear skirt.
I like the opaque skirt because when I get a nosebleed, you can't tell that my mask is full of grossness. So just just being real with y'all.
Yeah. What do we all think about? I have to bring it up because I feel like it isn't talked about enough. What do we feel about the circular mono lens
Oh,
masks? The
it's the
old.
coolest looking mask ever, self-proclaimed by anyone who wears one. Um, I mean, hey, listen, they worked for decades before we kind of got into the newer style of mask. I personally don't know of any shop who's like still selling that style of mask. I know they're out there, like I know you can find them. Um, like they're fine, whatever. Would you catch me wearing one? Probably not. From like a looking cool perspective, I'm that guy that said, like don't look cool, find what fits, and then I'm like, I wouldn't look cool, so I wouldn't wear it. Um, yeah, man, like if you rock it, like I'm gonna be impressed. Like, yeah, good for you, bro. But
It's almost like looking through a tunnel though. Like the lens is sitting so far away from your face. It's yeah, not my favorite.
yeah. So, I think the next thing that I would think about buying after my big three would be some sort of exposure protection. So a wetsuit or a dry suit, depending on where you dive. And I'm going to put the caveat out there that if you are looking into purchasing a dry suit, you should 100% be taking a dry suit course. That is a specialty course. In how to dive safely with a dry suit because it's not as simple as just putting it on and staying dry. There is a lot that goes into knowing how much air to add to your dry suit to provide that barrier between you and the water, as well as how to release that air or how to not get squeezed by the dry suit. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I'm putting on my safety hat and saying, if you're going to be purchasing a dry suit, you 100% should be taking a dry suit course to complement that purchase. So with that caveat out there, I think all of us both dive in both dry suits and wetsuits, and semi-dry suits. So we've all had experience diving all three. Um, and there's pros and cons to all of them. Obviously, the biggest pro con for the sake of this episode is the cost that is associated with purchasing exposure protection. If you are looking to get into exposure protection on the less expensive side of things, buying a dry suit is not going to um, do that. I think buying my dry suit put me into some pretty serious debt. So,
I'm going to say something that goes against the same advice that I'm, and not safety wise, everything's safe what I'm about to say, but it's going to go against the exact advice that I'm also going to say. For exposure suits, um, we'll talk about it a little bit after, but you should always buy new. My dry suit, however, I did buy used. And it made it quite a bit cheaper because it was used. I was buying it from a store going out of business, and it was a Black Friday sale. So I had like all of these sales piling up on it. That being said, I still spent about $1,000 on it, including all of my undergarments, which is cheap for a dry suit. That's not a entry level suit though. If you are just starting out, obviously that is not going to be your first purchase. I only bought it because I was diving throughout the year and I was working throughout the year while diving, so I really needed to have that exposure suit so I could continue to dive throughout the year. But again, I say that that's a little against my normal advice for suits, but I did buy my dry suit used, but it was still expensive. It still was not cheap.
and just for context, folks, a dry suit new can range anywhere between $1,500 on the cheaper side of dry suits all the way up to like 5 grand plus on the more expensive side of dry suits. And that's just for the outer layer. You still need to buy undergarments that go underneath that outer layer, depending on the type of dry suit. But most times you're going to have some sort of undergarment underneath your um, dry suit, which can range anywhere from like 200 to another $1,500 for your undergarment. So this is not a budget way of diving. Um,
Even on sale, it's not a budget way of diving.
yeah. So
Even
wetsuit
used.
is definitely going to be the way to go. Um, I bought my first wetsuit used, which is different than what Shannon just kind of mentioned. But I also would agree that buying a new wetsuit is the way to go. One, nobody's peed in it. You get to be the first to pee in your own wetsuit. And a wetsuit is really something that you need to buy to fit specifically to you and something that you want to last you a while. And so like spending a little bit more to get into a new wetsuit than buying a used one that's gonna maybe not last you as long, you're gonna end up spending that money again anyways. So I think buying a new one first is the best bang for your buck um, when buying a wetsuit.
A
And
new
again, yeah, go ahead, Danny.
A used wetsuit is also going to have like broken down and lost some of the insulation value to it. Like if you buy a used 7 millimeter wetsuit, if it's been, 2 or 3 years old, like it's probably realistically like a 5 millimeter suit at that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Dive suits specifically, a neoprene material, only lasts, I mean, a decent amount of dives still, but a few hundred, several hundred dives, right? Which is a lot of dives. But if you're buying used, you don't know how many dives that suit has on it. So I do work, I dive for work, and those suits, I wear them in the water for 4 weeks straight, 8 hours a day. And the way that that breaks down in dives is about an hour a dive, which means I'm using that suit for like 200, 300 dives just over a few weeks. So that suit has already lost a lot of its capability as a dive suit. And you don't know, if you're buying used, how that suit was being used. So besides it maybe being peed in many, many times, or being ripped or broken or not stored properly, you also don't know how many dive hours it has on it. So buying used could just be giving you, very thin material that's not going to keep you warm.
So yeah, I think buying new is the way to go with a wetsuit. And we're not talking, folks, about a crazy difference between the cost of what it's going to cost you used to new. You might spend $100 more to buy a new one compared to a used one, which like kind of sounds like a lot, but when you're going to get 200 more dives out of it, then um, you know what it would cost you to buy the used one. Like I do think that it's the way to go. Um, and yeah, it's yours and it fits you. And your
Yeah,
shop helped you to make sure you got into the perfectly fit wetsuit for you. So yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Now the investment zone, the where we're gonna start spending some serious money, right? So this is your BCD, your regulators, and a dive computer. Um, so I guess I'll start by saying when should you rent versus when should you buy? And I think there's nothing wrong with renting this gear at first, especially if you're still figuring out like do I really want to invest into this sport? So, what are your thoughts, friends?
I think so. Like I said earlier, there is some benefit of having your own, obviously, because if I wanted to go diving, all I would have to do is grab my gear, maybe fill a tank, and then drive out to the beach. So there is that barrier that is a little harder, because if I'm going to rent, I have to, me specifically, there aren't too many dive shops near me. I think the closest one is a 40-minute drive. I have some brand loyalty to the dive shop that I go to, so I will be driving about an hour and a half to get to a dive shop personally. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone. But renting gear, you do have to make sure you go all the way out to a dive shop, pick up the gear, and then you're gonna, take it the day before, then drive out to the ocean the next day. So there is a extra step involved in doing it. However, the cost of doing that extra step is going to be cheaper than buying outright your new gear. So I would say rent until you are sure that you are going to continue diving, that you want to dive for a long time, that you have a way to consistently dive. Because if you end up buying your gear and then your dive buddy moves across the country and you never get to dive with them and you haven't quite made new dive buddy friends, you won't be going to the ocean as often. And while there are clubs, there are, meetups, there are all sorts of things that you can get involved with to keep diving. If you're not able to dive consistently, renting will be a little bit cheaper and you're going to form a really great relationship with the dive shop that you rent from because you will be seeing them every so often. And I think that'll really help you in the long run when you do decide to buy. But I think renting your gear for the beginning of diving is a very viable, very good option. And I did it for the first 6 months to a year of diving because I didn't have the money to buy my own gear and it was cheaper to rent and I was able to have a good relationship with my dive shop.
Yeah, and I think
Sure.
one of the benefits to renting too is you can try out different types of gear, right? Um, depending on what shop you rent from, they might only have one style of BCD and regulator in their rental program. I'll say that like we're spoiled at our dive shop because they basically have everything in their rental program. So if you want to try more of that kind of, I don't want to say traditional, but the jacket style BCD compared to a plate and wing style BCD, like our dive shop has both of those options available for rent. So you could rent kind of more of that traditional jacket style, or you could rent the back plate and wing to figure out, all right, I think I'm more comfortable in my trim and buoyancy when I use the back plate style compared to the so it helps inform the decision when you do eventually buy. And then the other thing I'll say about renting is, again, I can really only speak for our dive shop, though I'm pretty sure most dive shops do this, is if you're looking to buy a set of gear, you might be able to buy something out of the rental program used, which has been serviced and properly maintained by the dive shop at a much more affordable and accessible price point than buying something brand new. And this is where I'll say that buying used is, something that's acceptable to do. With the caveat that if you're going to buy used, I think it is 100% uh like a non-negotiable for me. I'm not buying used unless it's coming from the dive shop. Um, the reason behind that is I know that if the dive shop is selling me something used, they've inspected it, they've serviced it, and they're gonna continue to service it afterwards, right? So this is where I'm gonna say buyers beware. Don't buy from Facebook Marketplace, especially these items, because this is your life safety stuff. This is your the air that you're going to be breathing and the way that you're going to get yourself back on the surface and stay on the surface. So, like, for BCD's regulators and a computer, like, I would not recommend buying off of like Facebook Marketplace or eBay or any of those places. Go to your local dive shop, see what they have for used gear. Like I said, they might have stuff on their rental program, or they might have taken stuff in from other clients who are upgrading their gear. But this is stuff that that dive shop has serviced. They're going to continue to service it when you bring it in for your annual service. And they're kind of the experts, right? Like they're the ones that know this gear very intimately and can say, yes, this is safe for you to dive with. You have no idea what the quality or integrity of the gear that you're buying when you buy it on Facebook Marketplace. Somebody could put in the description like, "Hey, just serviced," but you have no way of really knowing that. And for me, I'm not willing to put my life on the line breathing on a regulator that I bought off of Facebook Marketplace. So I
Mm.
can't stress enough, go to your local dive shop. Purchase used gear if you're going to buy it from your local dive shop because they're going to be the ones that say, yes, this is safe, and I would trust the expert at the local dive shop, who's likely the one servicing that gear.
I have a story about dive gear purchased on Facebook Marketplace.
Oh boy, I can't wait
Um,
to hear it.
so two folks I know through the university dive program. I was going out diving with a couple friends, and we stopped at one of the dive locations because there are public bathrooms there before we went off to the actual dive site we were going to go to, and we saw two people we knew there. They were gearing up and getting ready to go diving at that first site. And when I reconnected with them later in that week, I think they had told us that they weren't really able to do their dive as planned because the regulator one of them bought off Facebook Marketplace just free flowed as soon as they turned the tank on, couldn't get it to stop. So mistake number one was buying the regulator off of Facebook Marketplace. Mistake number two was continuing to dive even though they didn't have that working regulator. So these guys, they went and they dove in uh their gear, but they used one regulator, and just one took the primary, one took the octo.
No,
And
no, no, no.
yeah, so don't
So
don't don't get your gear on Facebook Marketplace, and if it's not working, cancel the dive. Don't be, that was a huge risk that they took. So
yeah, friends, if you have a gear malfunction, I am sorry to tell you, but your dive is done. Right?
Yep.
This is when you look at your buddy and you say, "Hey, I have an issue with my regulator. I'm all done. Let's surface." Right? That is not the time to be like, "All right, let's share one regulator." That is not safe. And so great story, Danny. I mean, that is a great point, right? Like, I think so many times we're like so excited about diving that our gear messes up and we're like, well, we'll just keep diving. It's fine. No, it's not. This is how people get hurt. This is how people end up not surfacing from their dive. And we want to keep diving. We don't want to risk one 30-minute dive of our life um, if you have a gear malfunction, your dive is done, turn the dive, get back to the surface, and then get to your dive shop to get your gear serviced or replaced. Do not keep diving on broken gear.
Yeah. To add another thing that those divers should have done, if you do buy used gear or get used gear from someone, well, maybe you don't even buy it, but you're donated used gear from a friend who no longer wants to dive, bring it to a shop to get serviced. Talk to your dive shop, say, here's the situation, here's why I have this. Can you look at it? Do you have the parts to service it? Are you willing to service something even if I haven't bought it at your store? You know, bring it to a shop before you dive it. Because even if you hook it up the first time and it works and you can breathe off of it, that does not mean that it is actually working. So if you ever do find yourself in possession of used dive gear that is not bought through a shop, bring it to a shop to get serviced if they will service it.
So yeah, I think the only other thing we'll kind of comment on is a dive computer. Um, my hot take on dive computers is there's two different types. Well, there's several different types of dive computers. Um, the kind of biggest difference in terms of your investment zone is going to be air integrated versus not air integrated. Um, I I started with an computer that was not air integrated. I quickly found that that was a feature that I really desired and upgraded to a computer that was air integrated, and then quickly upgraded to another computer that was air integrated. So I think that like this is where I kind of made the buyer's mistake. So I ended up buying three different computers to settle on the one that was the right one for me. And like if I had just hit pause for a second instead of needing the gear right away, I probably would have saved a lot of money in the long run. So I think having a computer is better than not having a computer at all. But I think if you're gonna be like, well, I only want to spend money once, just save up until you can buy an air integrated computer. Now, like how you end up getting your air integrated computer, you got to find what style and combination work best for you. I personally like a wrist-mounted computer with a pod that connects, via the supersonic waves or Bluetooth, or I don't know how they connect, but it connects wirelessly to the wrist-mounted computer to transmit my pressure. They do make ones that are attached to a hose that go directly to your first stage. So there's several different styles of computer. You got to find what it is that's best for you. But I personally would say just save up your money until you can afford to get one that is air integrated. You can also rent computers as part of your rental package, so don't feel like you have to buy a computer right away because you can't get it in rental gear. A lot of places will rent a dive computer. Um,
I dove a Cressy Leonardo for about 4.5, 5 years before getting into my Cento Eon Core Black, which is if you're gonna look at computer types, they're kind of like the lowest to one of the highest. It was a big jump for me. I mean, my Cressy, like I love it, and I handed it off to my partner who dives because I was like, well, I it's not broken. I'm not gonna throw it away, and he doesn't dive often, so he can use it when he dives. He can record his dives. Um, I can't ever find a battery replacement for it. So Danny was a part of this saga a few years back in Key Largo. Um, I love the computer. I dove it forever. The battery was running low, and I took the backing off of it, put it aside, took the battery out to find a battery replacement. And I'm also going to tell you, don't do this. Bring it to a dive shop to replace the battery because they can order the kits. They will be able to replace it for you. They know how the seals work better than I, as an individual, do. But when I first had to change the battery, I didn't realize all of that because I wasn't thinking about it. But bring it to a shop to change your battery. They make sure that it is going to stay waterproof and withstand the pressure that I can't do at my house. But I didn't do that. I took the back off. I put the battery aside to try to find one, lost the backing of it. And this dive computer is not, I mean, there are versions of it that are still made, but I bought an older version when I first bought it, and there are newer versions since then. And I had to go to so many dive shops to try to order this part. I ordered one at a dive shop near me. I, couldn't find it. And then we were in Key Largo and we went to Sailfin Scuba and we walked in and I was just like shot in the dark. Do you have the backing for a Cressy Leonardo of this year with a battery? And they're like, yeah, we do. And I was like, okay, fantastic, great. So now, now we have the backing. I have a new battery in it. It's my partner doesn't dive very often, so it's not losing battery very quickly, which is great news. But I dread the day when I have to replace the battery again. All that to say, I loved my basic computer. I dove it for 5 years. I never felt the need to upgrade until recently when I'm starting to get into some more advanced types of diving. But the air integrated is so fantastic and so nice. I mean, not having to have an extra hose, although sometimes I have an extra hose anyways because I like redundancy, but not having to have a gauge on your regulator, it makes you feel so sleek and so streamlined, and you don't have all these hoses that you need to tuck or clip or put away. So it is really nice to have air integrated and to have computers with all those functions. But to reiterate what Matt said, a dive computer is a dive computer, and at its base level, they will all do the same thing. They will track your dive, they will make sure you're not going into deco, they will make sure that you know what your service interval is, and they will make sure you know when you can fly again. So at its base level, that's what your dive computer is going to do, and you want it to do that. And then from there, you can decide, oh, am I going to be doing more advanced dives? Do I, what kind of things do I need on a computer that's going to make my dive even easier for me to log afterwards and to work on afterwards?
The air integration is a really awesome thing to have. But when we're getting into the more advanced computers, a lot of them, if not all of them, have a integrated compass as well. And being that we do so much shore diving, we're usually, and in New England, where you can't really rely on natural navigation throughout the entire dive, we're usually using our compass all the time. And having the ability to eliminate another piece of gear by having the compass integrated in the computer is really awesome. And if your compass is a separate piece of equipment that you might strap on your wrist or something, or clip to your BCD, that's something that you might forget. So having the air integration, the compass integration, having it all in one package all at once is a pretty awesome feature to have, and less gear to worry about, where it is or if you forget it or whatever.
So yeah, a couple of quick tips, just to kind of wrap up this section, um, for buying gear. So, again, I'll reiterate, buying used. Don't buy from Facebook Marketplace, and go to your local dive shop to see what they have to offer used. If you do buy something used, not from your local dive shop, 100% need to bring that to your local dive shop to get serviced, before you trust your life on it. Rent gear while you're saving to purchase. It is a much more affordable way to get out into the water diving while you're saving up your pennies to make those bigger um, purchases. I would say shop local versus online. Um, you can go to websites online and buy brand new dive gear, but here's the thing. Somebody on one of the trips that I went on made the perfect point. If you're gonna buy online, go get your tanks filled online. Oh wait, you can't do that, right? So this is about preserving the industry. Um, Dive shops are closing around the world because online competitors are offering better deals, better. But this is our community, folks. So now more than ever, it's important to support your local dive shop. They're a small business, and they rely on your business to keep their doors open. So buy local, keep that community local, because these might be your people that you end up going diving with. And we want to support our local dive community. Ask your instructor or dive buddy before buying. If you're diving with somebody who's more experienced, has more gear, has been doing it for a while, they're obviously going to know a little bit more about what gear is good gear or not so good gear. And then your instructor is a great person to kind of bounce gear questions off of, if you still have a relationship with your instructor after you complete your course, which I hope you do. Um, Try before you buy. Go to the pool and try out gear. Um, and then some shops offer like a rent to own program or financing options. You got to talk to your local shop about what those availabilities are. But that is something that is available to some places. So if that is something that works for you, you got to work that out with your dive shop. And yeah, those are my tips and tricks. I think that we can just plug right along into our next segment, which is, you guessed it, folks, Dive Confessions, Gear Edition. Last week we did Dive Confessions, or last episode we did Confessions, things Danny hasn't heard. Yep, we told stories that Danny hadn't heard. And this week we're doing Dive Confessions, our Gear Edition. So, I'll start with talking about one of my dive buddies. Friend of mine, we were diving and he giant strided in off the boat and his fin snapped. Now, I don't necessarily think that this was a like, oh, you bought cheap gear or you bought the wrong gear. I think that it was just maybe a little bit of bad technique and uh, coupled with a little bit of bad luck. So we had to like go out. Thankfully, it didn't snap so bad that he couldn't complete his dive. Um, but we did end up having to like make a quick run to the local dive store, to where we were diving and get a new set of fins so he could dive the rest of the week. And he ended up actually not buying just like the cheapest pair of fins, which is what I thought he was gonna do. He bought like a pretty midline or mid price range set of fins and really loved them. So I'm happy about that for him. But it was kind of an embarrassing moment when, giant stride in and snap. Um, the fin literally like snapped in half from the foot pocket to the blade. It was pretty impressive actually. So that's my dive confession. I mean, it's not me, but I'm going to talk about my friends. So,
I'll also share a dive confession gear edition story that's not my own, but I was on the dive for it. And a piece of gear that I think maybe gets forgotten is dive gear sometimes. Um, I was on a boat doing some boat dives, and I hopped in the water with three other divers. We were in our buddy pairs. But once we got in, one of the buddies of the other buddy pair had a free flow in their tank. Something had happened with their O-ring, which is dive gear, that we don't necessarily always think about and always check, even though we should check our O-rings every single time we dive. Something had happened with their O-ring that either it broke or when they pressurized their tank, it didn't seat properly, so they had that free flow. We all came back to the boat nice and safely. We shared air. We were able to practice our drills that we learned in scuba class, which is great. We got to the boat safely, and we, you know, at that point checked the O-ring and saw that there was a problem with it. So this is kind of a PSA to always check your O-rings on your tanks to make sure that they are full, not broken, not off of the tank, and that you are able to dive with their tank with that O-ring in place. So that's my kind of gear edition dive confession, which also isn't my own dive gear, but an important story nonetheless, I think.
Wait, the O-ring was completely gone?
No, it wasn't completely gone. I think it was
Oh,
just
okay.
broken or cracked, and when it was pressurized, it got worse. So,
I think for my dive confession, I might tell the story about the first time I took my dry suit into the ocean. Um, so like Shannon, I also got my dry suit from a shop that was going out of business or shutting down. So I did the course, I worked with an instructor in the pool, and when I took it to the ocean, well, partly I had some bad advice because this instructor had told me that since it was a neoprene dry suit, the insulation inherently in the suit would be enough that I'd really only need like long johns under it. And it was diving in Rockport in March, water was like probably still in the low 50s, and that was not nearly enough. Not nearly enough in the undergarment department. So that was a pretty cold and miserable dive, considering I was expecting to finally be warm enough in Rockport because I never had been. Um, so yeah, that's my dry suit confession.
remember the first time that um, Danny was almost warm enough in New England? I think you and I, Danny, were doing a dive. Was it Cath Cathedral Rock? Was that where we
Was
were?
it was it Bath Beach in December or was it
It was a
Cathedral in
winter. It
November?
was in the winter. I remember that much. I looked at you at one point and gave you kind of the signal for "Are you cold?" And you were like, you gave me the okay symbol back, and I was like, wait a second, Danny is always cold. And we were like 38 minutes into this dive, which is long in the wintertime in um, New England. And so I was like, hold on a second. You're not cold? And he was like, no, no, I'm good. And so we had like, I think close to an hour dive that day. And I got out and I was like, Danny, there's no way you're not cold. And he was like, no, I'm good. And I was like, all right, we figured it out. We finally have the right mix of exposure protection to dive in New England in the wintertime. And I was the one that actually had to turn that dive because my hands got cold. So it was me that got cold, and I'm not normally one to get cold on a dive. So that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, we've finally found the way for me to be warm enough in New England. You just have to spend as much money on dive gear as my first car.
Yeah. So again, not for the budget diver. But that's why we're three broke divers, because we've spent all of our money on diving. So we posted on Instagram and on our last episode asking folks to submit questions. We actually got some, so thank you to our listeners. I think we already answered one. Somebody on Instagram asked us what would be red flags or advice about buying online, which we've covered ad nauseum. So I don't think that we need to readdress that question, but thank you for posting that question to us on the Instagram. And then the other question we got was about dive lingo, not so much dive gear. So our listener wrote, I am curious about some diver lingo and would love to hear more about it if you guys are into it. As a new diver, I know there is some technical jargon that I just don't know yet, but I'm curious what some slang terms mean, like turtled, sand shark, silt out, etc., or any other that you guys feel are used often. And then they wrote that they loved our podcast and that they're excited for the weekly treat. All the best, a totally anonymous fan, which we actually
Aw.
know who it is. But so I think that
Um,
that's a great question for us to kind of talk about. Is like, what is some of the jargon that we use? Because I know that there is kind of like a whole nother language in scuba diving. So let's address it. What do you guys think?
I can cover silt out because unfortunately in my line of work that is kind of the conditions I dive in regularly. So silt out is basically something happens while you're diving and you stir up all of the ground sediment and the dirt that's coming or the sand, whatever is the substrate, the bottom of the ocean that you're diving on. You stir it up so much that you can't see. Sometimes we call it a brownout too because you are just looking through tan walls of sand in the water column and it is miserable. And my suggestion, if you ever find yourself in a condition like that, is to ground yourself. So hold your hand on something physical and tangible, like even if it's just putting it in the dirt. Um, so you can wait till that passes and settles. So if you really cannot see and you don't know if you're going to be able to get out of the silt out by swimming forward, make sure you are able to stay with your buddy and stay stationary until that silt passes. Sometimes you can just swim past it because you've kicked it up and you know if you keep going forward, it's not going to be kicked up anymore because you weren't there kicking it up. So that's another solution if you ever find yourself in a silt out. But silt out is, yeah, sand kicked in the water column, creating a screen that you cannot see through.
Yeah, I don't know turtles.
I
I
haven't
don't
heard that either.
that one's new to me.
Well, I know we talk about turtle navigation, which is when you pop up to the surface slowly, doing your slow ascent. You pop up as if you were a turtle taking their breath after they take their long nap, and then you go back down to finish your dive. So maybe that's it. And we also talk about people turtling when their gear doesn't quite fit them and they kind of roll around and look like they're.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what Shannon was saying. It's like someone who can't, you know, really figure out how to right themselves when they're kind of topsy-turvy with a heavy steel tank on their back. So turtled is when you flip over and you can't really get back to the correct trim.
When I read it, I immediately thought of like Finding Nemo with Finn Noggin dude, the turtle, but that's definitely not it. And then yeah, I mean, I think there's some other slang words or like not slang words, but like jargon used. Like my favorite one that I hear like when I go diving on boat dives is like the captain will be like, "Okay, boats pool's open." And it's like, well, it's the ocean, it's not the pool. But I think like they're referring to like that it's okay to get in the water now. Um so that one I know gets thrown around a lot, like, oh, pool's open, hop on in. Um, and then like obviously like getting narked or getting the
Mhm.
bends are shorthand terms for dive related um not illnesses. I mean I guess like
Ailments.
ailments. Getting narked is when you are suffering the side effects of nitrogen narcosis. Um, and I'll toss it to Shannon to explain that a little bit more because I'm not a dive professional. So,
Sure. So, nitrogen narcosis is something that can happen to anyone at any time. It could happen at any depth, and if it happens to you at one depth, one dive, it might not happen to you at that same depth another dive. There's not there's tons of research on it, but nothing that's really nailed it down or narrowed it down to understand what is happening and why it's happening and when it's happening. Basically, it is a feeling of being a little out of it, a little loopy, not really all there while you're diving. That has to do with the nitrogen absorption in your body. I'm not a doctor, not a scientist, so I don't know a ton about it either. This is just what I've been taught throughout my training. There is a relatively easy solution for it, luckily, which is surface a little bit, come up a little bit, wait till the effects wear off. If you don't feel comfortable continuing your dive, don't continue your dive. But if you're no longer suffering from narcosis, you can continue that dive probably at a shallower depth than you're going to want to be at. So narcosis is makes you feel a little loopy, little buzzed as if you were drinking alcohol, but again, it's not, you're not drunk. It just maybe is a way to make you understand what the feeling feels like.
and I'll say that, if corrected, right? So if you ascend a little bit and you get that mental clarity, this is a dive ailment or symptom of diving that is not typically life-threatening. So meaning that, the solution to this problem is pretty simple. You ascend a little bit, and then once you've ascended a little bit, you get that kind of mental clarity back. You are all intents and purposes kind of quote unquote healed from that ailment, right? You self-righted that problem. So not life-threatening. However, if you ignore the signs of narcosis, you could find yourself in trouble, not necessarily from the narcosis, but from you maybe bad decisions you make while you're narked. And then the bends, on contrary, is a serious um, side effect of diving that can happen if you do not address, your surface correctly or whatever. So the bends is something that would be considered more of a life-threatening injury from diving that you do need medical attention for. So you need to get out of the water. You need to call Dan and seek immediate medical attention. And I think that's all we'll say about that because, again, for kind of liability standpoint, we're not going to give you medical advice on what to do. But if you are experiencing any sort of symptoms of pain or anything related to what you learned about the bends in your dive training, seek immediate medical attention is the only advice we will give. So. There is a
Dan,
ton of jargon out there as it relates to diving, and you may find that there's things that like you and your buddy group decide is, the jargon that you're using, which might not be industry standard, but that's what it becomes. So like oftentimes you might hear somebody say something, you're like, what the heck does that mean? Who knows? Maybe they made their own jargon up.
absolutely.
So yeah.
Similarly with hand signals, right? We have different, well, there are some universal hand signals. There are different people and different agencies that have different hand signals. So just like with jargon, go over your hand signals before you dive with a buddy. It's always good to make sure you're on the same page and then, create your own jargon and let us know what it is because I think that's super fun. Do you have some fun thing that you refer to your dive buddy as? Do you have any fun jargon? Because we'd love to hear it. Maybe we'll include it in our own personal vocabulary of dive lingo if you send in something that's particularly fun or interesting.
We've had a great chat about gear today, and I think that we've given you some food for thought to think about when you're getting into your first set of dive gear. And, if we didn't answer your question or this stemmed more questions, please feel free to DM us or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Next time, we're going to talk about what's the deal with dive certifications, what certs matter, what is the progression of dive certification, what it looks like, and why PADI isn't the only option out there, or NAUI for that matter. There's tons of dive certifications to get your next dive cert from, and we're going to talk about them all. So,
Thanks for listening to episode 2, Dive Safe, Dive Local, and Buy Dive Gear Local. We'd love to hear from you. Any horror stories or questions about gear, questions for future episodes. So don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at 3 Broke Divers.